Hi, this is Blake.
Hi, this is Cameron. We welcome you to yet another episode of Trust Talks.
All right, so you're prepping for this big business deal, and you want to make sure all the legal stuff is squared away, right?
Of course, who doesn't?
Exactly.
Okay.
Nobody wants a nasty surprise down the line. So that's what we're diving into today. MSAs and TAYEV, those two key agreements everybody's always asking about.
Yeah, always a hot topic.
You bet. And you sent over some really interesting articles from TrustCloud. And thankfully, I've got an expert here to help us unpack all this.
Happy to be here.
I think before we get into the weeds, maybe we can start with a quick analogy, just to give everybody a sense of the difference between these two agreements. So amateurly, you're building a skyscraper. The MSA, that's your master service agreement. That's like the blueprint for the entire building. It's setting the foundation, the structure, the overall rules of the game. But the TOS, your terms of service, that's more like the building directory. It tells each individual tenant, in this case your users, how to navigate the space, what they can and can't do.
So MSA big picture 2S user guidelines.
Exactly. And we've got a great article from TrustCloud that digs into this. It asks the question, are the terms of service the same as the master service agreement? And it starts by breaking down what a TQuase actually is.
Yeah.
And, we see these things everywhere, right? Every app you download, every website you visit, they all have those TQuases that you usually just click agree to without even reading.
Oh, yeah. Totally guilty of that.
Me too.
Yeah.
But that's where it gets interesting, right?
Exactly, because even though we treat them like an afterthought, a T2S is a legally binding contract. It's there to protect the company, of course. But it also sets the ground rules for users. It's kind of like a digital code of conduct.
So it's not just about saying, hey, don't be a jerk on our platform. There's more to it than that.
Oh, yeah. Way more. Think about those user conduct sections. They outline what you can post, how you can interact with other users, what kind of content is allowed. It's all about setting boundaries. But it goes deeper than that. TOS also cover things like intellectual property, like who owns the content you create on the platform, and disclaimers that limit the company's liability if something goes wrong.
So they're covering all their bases, legally speaking.
Trying to, yeah.
Makes sense. Now let's shift gears and talk about MSAs. This is where things get a little more serious, I think.
A little bit, yeah.
We're talking big business deals,
Yeah.
long-term partnerships, complex services.
Right. Like imagine you're a company that provides software to banks, a very specific and complex service. You need to hammer out all the details with each bank, what software you're providing, how you'll implement it, who's responsible for how much they're paying you. All of that goes into an MSA.
Okay, so it's like a super detailed roadmap for that entire business relationship.
Precisely. And the article talks about scope of services as a key element of an MSA. It's about outlining exactly what's being provided, who's doing what, and over what time frame. And it's not just about making sure things run smoothly. An MSA protects both sides. It lays out payment terms so there are no surprises down the road. It sets performance standards to ensure quality, and even includes termination clauses to handle things if the partnership goes south.
So it's about setting those clear expectations from the get-go to avoid potential conflicts. Now, here's something that I thought was interesting. The article mentions that TES and MSAs, despite seeming so different, actually have some similarities.
Yeah, it does seem counterintuitive at first glance.
Right.
But at their core, both TES and MSAs are contracts. They're both legally binding agreements that establish terms and conditions, and those terms and conditions govern that particular relationship.
Okay, so whether it's a company and its users or two businesses working together, the underlying principle is the same. You need a contract to define the rules of engagement.
Exactly, and they often cover similar ground too. Think about confidentiality. Both types of agreements usually include clauses to protect sensitive information, and dispute resolution, how you handle disagreements. That's another common element.
So they're both laying down the law, just on different scales and for different audiences. But to be clear, they're not interchangeable. The article has a really helpful table that breaks down the key differences, and I think this will make things crystal clear for our listeners.
Definitely, let's highlight those.
Okay, first up, purpose. We already touched on this.
Yeah.
But 2S are all about setting rules for how users behave on a platform, right? While MSAs govern the big picture of those complex business collaborations.
It's like this, a 2S is like the rule book for a public park. It applies to everyone who enters. An MSA is more like a contract for a private event. It's specific to the parties involved.
I like that analogy. And then there's the parties involved. A 2S is one company dealing with potentially millions of individuals. While MSAs are usually a one-on-one deal between two specific businesses.
Think of it like a mass email versus a personal letter.
Perfect analogy.
Oh, man.
And finally, the scope. 2S are broad and general, applying to every single user. while MSAs are highly customized to the unique needs of that particular deal.
They have to be. Each business partnership has its own specific goals, its own challenges, its own complexities. You can't just use a one-size-fits-all approach.
Now, the article also offers some solid advice on when to use each type of agreement. It's all about choosing the right tool for the job right. And I think this is where it gets really practical for our listeners. So 2S are the go-to when you have a platform with a ton of users. Think apps, websites, online communities. You need a standardized set of rules to manage that crowd.
And MSAs are essential when you're embarking on a significant business partnership. We're talking about multiple projects, lots of moving parts, a long-term commitment. You need a rock-solid framework to make sure everyone's on the same page and protected.
Okay, so let's say you're launching a new e-commerce website. You'll definitely need a 2S for your customers, outlining how they can use the site, what they can buy, how they can interact. But you'll also need an MSA with your payment processing provider to iron out all those behind-the-scenes details like how payments are handled, fees, security protocols, all that good stuff.
That's a great example of how these two agreements work in tandem to cover different aspects of your business.
Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's talk about some best practices for drafting these agreements. Whether you're creating one from scratch or reviewing one someone else has sent you, there are some key things to keep in mind.
The most important thing is clarity. Both tariffs and MSAs should be written in plain language that's easy to understand. No one wants to wade through pages of legalese.
So no heretofores or party of the first part jargon.
Exactly. And fairness is crucial too. The terms should be balanced, protecting the interests of both parties involved. It's a two-way street, not a dictatorship.
Right. Makes sense. And of course, we can't forget about legal compliance. These agreements need to follow all the applicable laws and regulations.
Absolutely. You don't want to end up in legal hot water because your agreement is missing something crucial, or it doesn't comply with industry standards.
Okay, so let's recap what we've learned so far. TOS, your user rulebook. MSA is your business partnership blueprint. Both are essential tools for navigating the legal landscape of your ventures, whether you're dealing with thousands of users or one key business partner. But here's something to think about. We've been focusing on digital businesses today, but these agreements apply far beyond the tech world. Think about how they might show up in industries like healthcare finance or even creative collaborations.
That's a great point. The principles of clear communication and establishing a shared understanding are universal, regardless of the industry.
Exactly.
Welcome back.
All right, so we've covered those basics of MSAs and 2S, but now I think let's get down to brass tacks and see how these agreements actually play out in real-world scenarios.
So that's good. Let's do it.
Okay, first scenario. Imagine you're a software developer and you've just created this awesome new fitness tracking app.
People love it. It's gaining popularity. But now you need to make sure you're legally protected.
Right, because you've got all these users relying on your app. Sharing their personal data, you've got to set some ground rules.
Exactly. That's where your 2S comes in. It's like laying down the law for your app's little digital universe.
Exactly. You outline how users can use the app, what data you collect, how you protect that data, all that important stuff. And you've also got to be clear about what users can't do.
Right, like no sharing accounts, no attempts to hack the system, no using the app to harass other users. You have to set those boundaries.
It's about protecting yourself and creating a safe and fair environment for everyone using your app.
Now, let's say your fitness app really takes off and you start partnering with gyms and personal trainers to offer special deals and promotions.
Okay, so now you're not just dealing with those individual users. You're forging these business relationships.
Right, and that's where an MSA could come into play. Let's say you partner with a big gym chain. You need an MSA to outline things like how they can promote your app to their members, what data they can access, and how any revenue generated through the partnership will be shared.
So it's like taking that initial blueprint that we talked about earlier, the MSA, and creating a detailed floor plan for this specific partnership.
Right, because this gym partnership is unique. It has its own goals, its own challenges, its own financial arrangements. The MSA makes sure both you and the gym are on the same page and protected.
All right. Next scenario. You're a freelance graphic designer, and you've just landed this big project with a marketing agency.
You're excited about the creative challenge, but you also want to make sure you're not getting taken advantage of.
For sure. And an MSA is your best friend in this situation.
Absolutely. It outlines everything. The scope of the project payment terms, deadlines, who owns the rights to the designs you create. It covers all the bases.
And what's great about an MSA is that it also addresses those what-if scenarios.
Exactly. What if the project scope changes midway through? What if the agency is late with a payment? What if there's a disagreement over the final designs?
Having those things clearly spelled out in advance can save you a lot of headaches. and potential legal battles down the line.
It's all about protecting your creative work and your livelihood.
Okay, final scenario. You're launching an online marketplace where people can buy and sell handmade goods. Think Etsy, but for something totally unique.
This is interesting because now you're dealing with multiple layers of complexity.
You've got buyers, you've got sellers, you've got transactions happening all over the place. It's a lot to manage.
First and foremost, you absolutely need a 2S for your users. Both buyers and sellers need to understand the rules of the marketplace.
Right, like what kind of items are prohibited, how are payments processed, what happens if there's a dispute between a buyer and a seller. All of that needs to be crystal clear in your 2S.
But it doesn't stop there because you're facilitating these transactions. You'll also need MSAs with various other companies.
Like whom?
Well, you'll need an MSA with your payment processing provider to ensure secure and efficient transactions. You might need an MSA with a shipping company to handle the logistics of getting those handmade goods to buyers. And you might even need an MSA with an insurance provider to protect yourself against liability in case something goes wrong.
So it's like you're building this whole legal ecosystem to support your marketplace.
Exactly. And each of these agreements needs to be carefully crafted to address the specific needs and risks of each relationship.
These scenarios, I think, really highlight how important it is to understand when to use a 2S and when to use an MSA. And remember, the specific details will always vary, depending on your industry, your business model, and the nature of the relationship you're entering into.
But the guiding principles remain the same: clarity, fairness, and legal compliance. Those are your non-negotiables.
Now let's talk about some common pitfalls to avoid when drafting or reviewing these agreements. I know I've made my fair share of mistakes over the years.
Oh, we all have. That's how we learn, right?
Absolutely. So what's the biggest mistake you see people making when it comes to these agreements?
I'd say the most common pitfall is vagueness. People try to be too general in their language, thinking it covers all the bases, but that can actually backfire.
Because it leaves room for interpretation, right?
Exactly. Instead of saying something like, users must behave appropriately, you need to clearly define what constitutes inappropriate behavior. Give concrete examples, leave no room for ambiguity.
So be specific, spell it out, and don't assume anything.
Right. Another common mistake is neglecting to address intellectual property rights.
Oh, this is a big one, especially in creative industries or when you're dealing with software.
You need to be crystal clear about who owns the copyright, who has the right to use, modify, or distribute the work. All of that needs to be spelled out in black and white.
Because if it's not in writing, it's like it never happened.
And don't forget about those force majeure clauses. I know they sound intimidating, but they're really important.
Force majeure, that's basically a fancy legal term for acts of God, right?
It's exactly. Think natural disasters, pandemics, government shutdowns, those unforeseen events that could prevent someone from fulfilling their contractual obligations.
And having a clear plan in place for those what-if scenarios can save you a lot of trouble down the line.
It's like having an insurance policy for your agreement.
Now, here's a pitfall that I think a lot of people fall into, especially when they're starting out, trying to do it all themselves without seeking legal advice.
I can't stress this enough. MSAs and 2SS are legally binding documents. They have real-world consequences. If you're not sure what you're doing, it's worth investing in legal counsel.
I know it can seem like an added expense, especially when you're bootstrapping your business.
But trust me, it's better to spend a little money up front to make sure your agreements are rock solid than to end up in a costly legal dispute later on.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of the trends we're seeing in the world of MSAs and 2Ss. One thing that's been on my mind lately is the rise of those click-wrap agreements.
Ah, yes, the infamous I agree button. It's become ubiquitous in our digital lives.
But are they even enforceable? I mean, who actually reads those walls of text before clicking agree?
It's a good question, and the legal landscape is still evolving. Some courts have upheld the validity of click-wrap agreements, while others have raised concerns about whether users truly have an opportunity to understand the terms they're agreeing to.
So it's a bit of a gray area.
The key takeaway for businesses is this: transparency is paramount. You need to make sure your click-wrap agreements are presented in a way that gives users a genuine chance to review the terms. Don't bury them in fine print or make them impossible to access.
Another trend that's been top of mind is data privacy. With regulations like GDPR and CCPA becoming more stringent, businesses have to be extremely careful about how they collect, use, and protect user data.
Absolutely. Data privacy is no longer just a best practice, it's a legal requirement.
And we're seeing this reflected in both MSAs and 2S. Data privacy clauses are becoming more detailed and comprehensive, outlining things like data ownership, security obligations, and liability in case of a breach.
It's about building trust with users and ensuring that their data is handled responsibly.
And speaking of users, there's also a growing demand for more user-friendly agreements. People are tired of wading through pages of dense legalese that they don't understand.
I get it. It can feel like you need a law degree just to read a 2S.
And businesses are starting to get the message. We're seeing a shift toward plain language agreements that are easier to read and comprehend.
Think clear headings, bullet points, simple language, and even visual aids to break up the text and make it more digestible.
It's about making the legal stuff more accessible and less intimidating.
Because at the end of the day, these agreements are about establishing a clear understanding between parties. If no one understands what they're agreeing to, the agreement is essentially useless.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive. We've explored real-world scenarios, discussed common pitfalls, and even touched on some emerging trends.
But there's still more to uncover.
In Part 3, we'll delve into the future of MSAs and 2S and discuss how emerging technologies like AI and blockchain are shaking things up. All right, so welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into these MSAs and 2S.
Yeah, we've come a long way.
We really have. We've gone from the basics to those real-world applications. We've even talked about some potential pitfalls to watch out for. But now I think it's time to put on our futurist hats and explore how these agreements might actually evolve in the years to come.
Right, because as technology and business models continue to change, the legal frameworks that govern them also have to adapt as well.
So one of the biggest game changers I think that's on the horizon is artificial intelligence. AI is already being used in so many areas of business, and the legal field is no exception.
That's right. We're already seeing some really cool AI-powered tools that can help draft and review contracts, making the entire process faster and more efficient.
Wow, so instead of spending hours poring over these legal documents, you can have an AI do the heavy lifting for you.
Exactly. Imagine an AI that can analyze your business needs, assess the risks involved, and generate a customized MSA or TAS in a matter of minutes.
That would be incredible. It would free up so much time and energy for businesses to focus on what they do best.
Absolutely. But it's not just about speed. AI can also help to identify potential risks and ensure compliance with all those ever-changing regulations.
So it's like having a digital legal expert on your team, constantly scanning for potential issues and making sure you're covered.
Exactly.
But of course, AI in this context also raises some pretty interesting ethical questions.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, who's responsible if an AI-drafted contract contains errors or omissions? Or what if it makes decisions that are biased or unfair?
Those are definitely issues that we're going to have to carefully consider as AI becomes more integrated into the legal profession.
It really is a brave new world out there. Now, another technology that I think has the potential to disrupt those traditional agreements is blockchain.
Oh yeah, blockchain for sure.
Now, for those who might not be familiar, blockchain, that's the technology behind cryptocurrencies, right?
It is, but its applications go way beyond that. One of the most promising use cases for blockchain is actually in the realm of smart contracts.
Okay, smart contracts. So for our listeners who might not know, what are those?
Okay, so imagine an MSA or TOS. That's not just a static document, but a piece of code that lives on a blockchain.
Okay, I think I'm following so far.
And this code can be programmed to automatically execute certain actions when predefined conditions are met.
So for example, a payment could be automatically released when a milestone is reached in a project.
Exactly. Or a contract could be automatically terminated if one party fails to meet their obligations.
Wow, that's amazing. It would eliminate so much of the friction and potential for disputes
Yeah,
that we see with those traditional contracts.
it would, and it also makes the entire process more transparent and secure because every transaction and every change to the agreement would be recorded on the blockchain, where it's immutable and verifiable.
I mean, it sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, but it's happening right now.
It is, and while there are still some challenges to overcome, like scalability and legal recognition across different jurisdictions, the potential of these blockchain-based agreements is huge.
Definitely something to keep an eye on. Now,
Right.
beyond these specific technologies, I think there are also some broader trends that are shaping the future of these MSAs and 2S.
Definitely. Well, for one, I think business relationships are becoming increasingly complex. As companies become more globalized and interconnected, their agreements need to reflect that complexity.
Right.
Exactly, we're likely to see more specialized MSAs in 2S that are tailored to specific industries, specific types of transactions, and even specific geographic regions.
It's all about making sure that agreement fits the unique needs of the relationship.
Exactly.
And another trend that we've already touched on, but I think it's only going to become more important, is data privacy.
Absolutely, with those data breaches becoming more commonplace, and regulations like GDPR and CCPA becoming even more stringent. Businesses really have to step up their game when it comes to protecting user data.
Absolutely.
Data privacy is no longer an optional add-on. It's a fundamental requirement for any business that handles personal information.
Yeah, and that means that we're likely to see even more robust data privacy clauses in both MSAs and TOS, outlining things like data ownership, data security obligations, and liability in case of a breach.
Right. It's about building that trust with users and demonstrating a commitment to responsible data management.
And finally, I think there's a growing demand for more transparency and user-friendliness in these legal agreements.
Yeah, I totally agree. People are tired of being bombarded with all that dense legalese that they can't understand.
Right, it can feel like you need a law degree just to figure out what you're agreeing to.
Absolutely. But thankfully, we are seeing a shift toward more plain language agreements
Yeah.
that are much easier to read and comprehend.
That's great. And it's all about empowering individuals and businesses to make those informed decisions about the terms that they're agreeing to.
Because at the end of the day, these agreements are all about establishing a shared understanding and a foundation of trust.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of MSAs and TOS, I think the key takeaway is that these agreements are not static documents.
They're constantly evolving to keep pace with that changing technological and business landscape.
Exactly. And by staying informed about the latest trends and seeking expert advice when needed, you can ensure that your agreements are robust, compliant, and protect your interests.
Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just starting out, having a solid understanding of these agreements is essential for success in today's business world.
I completely agree. It's all about building a strong legal foundation for your ventures and fostering that culture of transparency and trust.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And with that, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive
I hope you've all enjoyed the journey.
and gained some valuable insights along the way.
Until next time.
Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.